Good evening.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm well. How are you this evening?
I'm okay for the most part. We've had a little bit of vehicle trouble over the past day or so. So
Uh-oh.
other than that, I'm good.
Uh-oh. What's going on? What, is it the big Jeep or the little Jeep?
The little Jeep. We've got a oil leak that is being somewhat problematic in finding.
Oof. Uh, I don't envy that at all.
Yeah, I have a feeling it's the rear main.
Like a seal?
Yeah.
Okay. That's the seal that connects the... No, I guess oil's not gonna... It's not gonna touch the transmission.
Well, the rear main would be where the transmission seats, though.
Okay, so it's what keeps the oil out of the transmission.
Right.
Gotcha. Ugh.
Yeah, pretty sure that's what it is. I decided to just take it into a shop, and so we should hopefully hear something tomorrow.
That's good.
Yeah, once you get in around the transmission, I tend to say, okay, that's beyond my skill level.
Yeah, I mean, I know enough to know that, like, transmission issues are something I take to, like, more or less certified technicians and mechanics because it's tricky around there. I had some tricky transmission stuff with my first 4Runner about 5 years ago, and most people would have considered what happens is the coolant mixes with the transmission fluid, and it's just bad news for the transmission. And some people shy away from it, like that's like the death nail in a coffin. We got it all flushed out, didn't put any pressure. We just let gravity do its thing. They didn't put any pressure moving the fluid through, and I don't know. We used a lot of transmission fluid to clean it out, and I then drove that 4Runner for 5 years. Trying to do the math in my head, almost 80,000 miles on the transmission after that failure, and had no transmission issues whatsoever.
Yeah, this. I mean, we haven't put that many miles on this one, and didn't see any indications of a leak until after the most recent oil change, which was about 600 miles ago. And decided not to take any real chances since I couldn't easily identify where it was coming from, and just took it into the dealer actually to have a full inspection done and see what they come back with.
Gotcha.
So I saw you started filling out follow-up.
Yeah, I decided that I didn't want to do a follow-up episode. I thought it was, it's getting too long to start waiting on follow. It's way past time for a follow-up. So I'm just like going through, listening to the things that I need to have follow-up on, and just adding them to the show notes and hitting them on the next show. So I've got 2 of them for this show. They both came from episode 2, which is called This is the Way. One is the Nike Plus Fuel Band. I said in that episode that I thought it was discontinued the same year as the Apple Watch, and then I said I thought it was like 6 months before, which doesn't make any sense because 6 months before the Apple Watch came out was the previous year, because Apple Watch was released in April. But it turns out the Nike Fuel Band, Nike Plus Fuel Band, that's the actual name, was discontinued a year, like April of 2014, and the Apple Watch was released in April of 2015. So it was a full year before the Apple Watch came out after its discontinuation. And I was reading somewhere that sometime pretty recently, I'm looking at the link, in April of 2018, Nike stopped supporting like all of the software. So all of their Nike Plus devices became unusable.
It seems like that was around the time that they really started ramping up marketing for Nike Run Club or whatever it is they call the app and integration with the Apple ecosystem in general. I know that it came out before then, but it seems like there was a big marketing push around then to transition to just using the app in conjunction with Apple's existing devices.
Yeah, and now they even have the Nike branded sport watch, Apple Sport or Apple Watch. Is it a sport edition?
And they have the Nike edition of the Sport Loops, and I think it gives you like access to a custom face or something like that. That a lot like the Hermes collaboration, where the faces for the watch that have the Hermes branding are only available if you purchase a model that has an Hermes loop or strap.
Right, which are those straps are not just a few bucks.
No, not even close.
They're about 10 times as much as the sport band or more.
I think the least expensive Hermes band is somewhere around $400, which would put it around 10 times more than the least expensive regular band.
Yeah, that's, hey, I gotta say, I just hope that they're paying their designers really well. That's I seriously do think about that. I can remember working with a designer for Coach, and sort of like trying to like low key ask, do you get paid well being a designer for Coach versus being a designer for some off brand that would end up in like a Walmart or a Kohl's or something like that? And the answer was yes. They did, at least in this case, she did. So I thought that, sort of like I remember getting my dad and my uncles giving me a hard time when I wanted to buy Nike shoes. They cost more than $40, and it's like they cost like less than $5 to make. And I was like, right, but somebody has, I wish I'd thought this as a teenager, but as an adult, it's like, yeah, but they pay their designers to do more. They have good designers, they pay them well, or at least on the top end of what you get in that design field.
Yeah, I would imagine that's fairly applicable across the board. Like I would not think that designers for lower priced products, they maybe get paid well, but I wouldn't expect them to be paid as well as designers for higher end products, just ubiquitously. Like there's a reason that the higher end products demand a premium price tag.
Right. I think I would expect that the margins on the higher end product, it's like the cost of materials for this thing at Fossil versus the cost of the materials for Coach, the cost of materials at Coach are higher than Fossil, but the margin is significantly higher than the margin for Fossil. So it goes somewhere, but I digress. So the second piece of fall. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say Digression's the name of the game, isn't it?
Now we have a title. The second bit of follow-up I have is it's from the same episode, and it is about the what I called the Apple HiFi, but it was actually the iPod HiFi. And it was just about the timing of the names. And it was released in February of 2006 and discontinued in 2007. I was pretty close with my 15-year estimate. I was thinking it was around 2005.
Yeah, it's still one of those handful of products that I would have liked to have been able to get my hands on and play with just from everything that I heard about it. But it's kind of irrelevant at this point.
So the Apple store that I worked in was using the iPod HiFi for all sorts of, like the store had one that they pennied out one for the store to use for whatever reasons they would need audio, and that's when I got to actually hear the music, because by the time I was working for Apple, it had been discontinued for 6 months, and so it was then that I heard it, and I was like, this thing is really good. Like for the $350, like it was $350. I think it was around $350. It was really good. I remember that in the Apple stores, they sold like a Bowers and Wilkins sort of it was called the Zeppelin, and it was this odd looking iPod speaker system, and it was I'm making more follow up for myself. I remember like these are just feelings. Like I remember my feelings are that my memory wants me to say that it was like maybe a few $100s more, and maybe didn't sound as good. I mean, it sounded pretty good, but I just remember being like very impressed with the sound of the iPod HiFi. So I'm not gonna follow up on this.
I think it's pretty easy to extrapolate that anyway, just based on the existence of the HomePod and its price point and how everyone has raved about its audio quality. I mean, Apple has historically dabbled in certain endeavors that may or may not have panned out for that particular product, but you can tell that there's a very strong desire to put in the market something that sounds really good and is extremely competitive at the price point or even below the price point of the competition.
Yes. I really think that audio is something that Apple should be doing. I mean, it's crazy. Apple AirPods, and this is before these figures come out before the AirPods Max. Is it AirPod Max? AirPods Max?
I think it's AirPods Max.
Yeah, the naming, like AirPods Pro, the naming, AirPods Pro, AirPods Max. The naming of this is just...
It's a little strange.
It's not, I was going to say, it's atypical, like, somehow they're in there and they're doing what's correct, according to the MLA or something like that, but it's awkward. And so... These numbers came from Charter, and this was before the AirPods Max were released. And the AirPods business by itself was like estimated in 2020 was $6.7 billion. And it was compared to Spotify, which was their entire business was $6.9 billion. So they're no joke. Like, just the AirPods and AirPods Pro by themselves are not a joke at all. And it feels like audio reproduction for Apple is just like a little hobby. I know that they use hobby with the Apple TV, and if I'm not mistaken, I don't feel like they've ever said the Apple TV is not a hobby anymore. I don't know.
No, I've never heard it referred to as anything other than a hobby still, but I think they have stopped specifically stating that it was a hobby.
Yes. Yeah. It was a hobby when you could connect the Apple TV to a television with a component hookup. It was they were definitely like, no, this is just a hobby. But audio reproduction feels like a hobby for Apple, and I really think, I mean, it's a device that they use to support like their main device, which is the iPhone. And it's a way to make the iPhone a better product. It keeps you in their ecosystem, and it could be a much bigger, they could make a whole company out of audio reproduction. I think middle of the road, high quality audio reproduction is something they could do so well. Like, I've never, like, for the device that it is and the amount that I paid for it, I've never been upset with the audio reproduction from an Apple device.
Yeah, I think that Apple tends to use the label of hobby just to have a certain set of expectations around it, a lot like they do the Pro nomenclature on a lot of devices. I don't think hobby means that, oh, we're going to toss this out there and just see what happens and maybe do some stuff with it. I think a hobby just means we have a certain R&D budget that we'll allocate, and we'll keep it going as long as there's a market for it. And then eventually it will either turn into a mainstream product, or we can just continue to do iterations as a hobby because it does make the experience and enjoyment of the platform better.
Yeah, I feel like a hobby is like a thing that is never going to be their main product. This product is just to enhance their main product. Their main product used to be computers, and I would still consider that a main product, but their other main product is an iPhone, and to a lesser degree, the iPad, and I think that's it.
You could still make the case that that's a computer as your main, as a product, though.
Yes. No, I 100% agree. iPhones are computers with a phone application.
Yeah, I mean, enough people use them as devices for everything other than phone calls at this point that it's kind of tough to separate the idea of it being a phone anymore. It's just a microcomputer.
I've been saying that for a dozen years. I mean, since I worked behind the Genius Bar, I was saying that because people would come in and be like, why doesn't my phone, have, 7 days of battery life like my old Nokia? And I was like, because it's a computer that you're using all day. Like, it's got a much bigger battery, but it does so much more. I would tell customers, you have to start thinking about your phone as a computer with a phone app and not a phone that does computer things.
Yeah, that was even more poignantly true when you started to look at the jailbreaking scene. And that's something I should probably at some point look closer at again and see if it's still even semi-popular. Because I can't think of anything that I would want to go down the route of jailbreaking for the past 5 or 6 years. Like it's been a while since I've even considered it.
Yeah.
And I was one of those who the first few iterations I did do so when I could, because there were some, I wouldn't say core functionality or even basic functionality pieces. It was more either customization driven, which is still semi-lacking, or with the first couple of iterations, it was just the nature of the job I was in, and it was nice to have access to a small computer to handle emergency situations quickly.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Of course, we could probably do an episode on that alone. There's
totally.
no reason to necessarily go down memory lane when it comes to iPhone usage and things of that nature.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say my only experience with jailbreaking of a phone was a customer that came into the Apple store, and this was before as a technician. It was a first generation iPhone, and you just see like Linux CLI readout on the screen of the phone, and it was at the time like the answer was replace the phone. Like it bricked the device. There was no coming back.
Yeah, especially in the early days, it was very much a risky endeavor because any number of things could go wrong, and there just was not a channel for support in any way. And over time, it got better because you had developers work on the equivalent of user-friendly UIs for the jailbreaking process. But even then, I mean, it's always been this could irreparably harm your device.
Yeah, I was going to say, in 2008, Apple's SOP for a device in that state was to replace it out of warranty. And at some point, I think they got to where, we would try DFU restores and see if that would work. And a number of times it would work. At least that my recollection is such. So
I see we added a micro topic based on a previous couple of text messages that we had before recording the show. You wanna go into that?
Yeah. So it was actually something that I'd been thinking of because I've been wanting to do this. Everything just sort of lined up perfectly. I'd been talking about doing a follow-up episode and just like catching up on all of the follow-up on the early episodes. And then earlier this week, before we had before we had this text message conversation, I'd already decided, I was like, I'm not going to do a follow-up show. I'm just going to listen to them and add the follow-up as I find it. It felt too daunting to create a follow-up show. But I was also thinking about the way follow-up is done in the Scrubs Rewatch podcast. So I'd mentioned to you that Zach Braff and Donald Faison started a podcast they made plans to do this podcast before the pandemic started, but the pandemic started before they actually released, I think even recorded their first episode. And so it's been something, it's funny because I'm only in the first season, and I say season because they're watching, they're dissecting and discussing and telling stories about what was happening to them when they were recording each episode of Scrubs. So I'm still in the first season, and in the first season, it's funny because Donald Faison is, they're doing the recording through Zoom, so they're doing a video chat and recording that for the podcast. And Donald Faison is in his closet. He's in a clothing closet, so there's clothes all around him, and he's usually drinking. Like I know one episode he was drinking a tequila sunrise. And it's just really funny to think, that image is really funny to me. Anyway, they had Bill Lawrence, the creator of the show and the showrunner, on the podcast, and he was great because he was able to give context to a lot of things. Like, this is what was going on behind the scenes, because he's probably the person that would be most knowledgeable about what the executive producers and the NBC executives are doing and wanting, and what he's dealing with them, what he's shielding his cast and crew from. And then in that first episode, he said, if there's any questions you have about the show, anything you want me to answer for you, just call me and I'll answer it. And so the way they've handled that is, in the show, they will have something, and he's like, Zach will ask Joelle, his I guess they would be a production assistant for the podcast, ask her to write down what it is they're gonna ask Bill. And so immediately after that, you hear Bill's audio, an audio clip added in line to the podcast, giving the answer to the question that they just had. So it's like all of these episodes, they get the answer before they've released the episode, and it's like real-time follow-up in all the episodes. And it's really cool because it's, that the call, they made the recording, they called Bill responded, recorded that, they edited it in, and I thought that was so cool. I had not heard a podcast that does that.
So is the name of it actually Rewatch, or is it something slightly different?
That's a good question. Well,
with a quick search, I'm seeing a reference to iHeartRadio.
Yeah, it's
podcast
Fake Doctors, Real Friends. Yeah.
Okay.
I think the unofficial subtitle might be the Scrubs Rewatch podcast, but it's real Fake Doctors, Real Friends. That's the name of the show. Thank you.
Yeah, I had to find it real quick so I could go ahead and add it to my list because I will forget otherwise. And of course, this came about because Emily and I started rewatching Scrubs from the first season this week, actually, or maybe into last week. Either way, neither one of us had ever watched it linearly, and I'm pretty sure I've seen all the episodes overall over the course of time. Just it was not a show that I followed, as episodes were released. But I know Emily has not watched very many at all. And so it seemed like something that was a good filler for when we didn't have as much time to watch something in the evenings. We're working our way through a number of different shows at this point.
Yeah, it's interesting because Scrubs is a really good one for me to think about in terms of how I feel like I've been nostalgic for the 90s for a long, long time, and a lot of it's because of the music, but I can see some of my nostalgia shifting towards the early 2000s, and Scrubs is one of the reasons why. And I sort of got to think about how there's not a lot of difference between the year 2000 and the year 1999. They're right next to each other. Like, the world was relatively the same.
Yeah, for us, it's been more a matter of, there's a little bit of an age gap as far as what we would have grown up watching. And so a lot of things that I've watched repeatedly, good example being introducing Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It's a cult classic at this point, but not something that Emily had ever watched. And so we watched it all the seasons through probably a couple of years ago now. I don't remember exactly when. But introduction to Ed, introduction to Battlestar Galactica. We've started watching Angel since it's spinoff from the original Buffy show. Mm-hmm. We're still working our way through The West Wing, and then Scrubs and Seinfeld occupy the sitcom spots at the moment. And I'm sure there's probably one or two other things that we're watching that I have forgotten about because we have so many that are kind of hanging loose that we got to work through. But those are the predominant ones.
Yeah, I would say, I was just thinking one of the shows that I like. So I have a real proclivity to evening time melodramas. The one that I liked the most was the OC, and that was early 2000s. And it was interesting because I saw it's on HBO Max right now, and I started rewatching it. I think the last day that I worked, I was working on stuff and I had it playing in the background. I watched all 4 Christmas episodes while I was working, and it was like a few days, like the day before Christmas Eve. So that was kind of fun. But I was noticing while I was watching that in the first season. So I would have been around, I was 22 years old when that show came out. And I can remember watching it and definitely identifying with high school kids, because it wasn't, it was only only been a few years since I'd been out of high school. But I started to like relate to the dad. I was like, oh, I don't want to be that kind of dad. I want to be a cool dad like that. And, but what really got me was that Becca's 5 years younger than me. And so when that show came out, she would have been 17, which was the age of the main characters. And I was like, oh. And I was like, that's kind of weird, because like I was in my early 20s and she was like a teenager. She was still been in high school. And then I realized today she's the age of one of the characters' moms, like how she is now. And I'm like, that's just, bizarre for me.
It's like, so it's 8 years between Emily and I. And, at this point, it doesn't really seem that drastic. But then you go back to me graduating high school and she's entering middle school, and you think about the difference in what you're watching and what you identify with, and it's just a drastic difference during that time frame. And so most of what we've gone back and followed up on have been either movies that were fairly popular in the mid-90s to early thousands, or TV shows.
Yeah.
And there have been a few that have been outside of that range that just weren't on the radar for her versus something that I was watching. But it's fun to go back and thinking about that, or see the differences there, and then see what you relate to now. And as you were saying it, something that popped in my head, I want to go back and watch that 70s show.
Oh, it's so good.
And see how much I relate to the dad there versus the kids.
So much. I mean, I love the dad the first time I watched it, but now I'm just like, oh, I want to be Red Foreman. I want to, there's a lot of Red Foreman I want to emulate. Let me say it that way. I love, Red Foreman memes are my favorite. But it made me, it's funny. It's like my friends will be like, oh, I had this memory about this thing when it came out, and it's like a high school memory. And I'm like, oh, I was the 20s. I was in my 20s when when that thing came out, I remember it too, just as well, but I was in my 20s. The best thing was that, they were giving me a hard time calling me old man. And so the next time they called me old man, I was like, yeah, I know, because I realized the last time I got a speeding ticket, none of you guys were in high school.
Yeah, that would probably be accurate for me as well, now that I think about it.
But, so I was going to, one of the things that I thought about, and I feel like this is going to be a clever segue, is in the second season of the OC, one of the characters gets to have a conversation with George Lucas. He's in an episode of the OC. And it's kind of weird to think about that now. At the time, I was like, oh, cool, George Lucas is in the OC. And this was, second season would have been 2004. So I think that was after Attack of the Clones, before Revenge of the Sith. And so, he's probably making the rounds, trying to create exposure for the movies. I don't know why, because it's Star Wars, but, that's what you do. But I thought about that, and because we were talking about seminal moments, and in that scene where he's talking with one of the characters from the show, he's talking about seminal moments in a teenager's life, and talks about American Graffiti. And I just thought I'd use that as a segue into talking about The Mandalorian.
Yeah, I think it works well. I did not realize Lucas had a role on the OC. The OC was not one of the shows that was on my radar at the time.
I will say, so if you watch Buffy, that's, melodramatic with a fantasy twist.
And I have my own guilty pleasures. Like I know the Vampire Diaries was more recent, but it was one that for some reason or another came across my radar, and I actually enjoyed it. And so I don't think I've watched all of it yet. But what I did watch of it was enjoyable. It was a nice little escape. And I remember True Blood being very popular.
Yeah.
I didn't really get into that one. I watched the first couple of seasons, and it was okay. I didn't mind it, but it just wasn't what I was looking for. And there was another one. I'm drawing a blank now. I'll probably think of it at some point. But all of it goes to kind of point to, it's interesting how you can tie a lot of gaps and pop culture to the different segments of the Star Wars timeline in general because of how long in between each trilogy. I looked it up real quick. It was episode 2 was 2002, episode 3 was 2005.
Yeah. So this would have been right between those.
And then I put a comment talking about going into The Mandalorian. I added a comment about Disney ruining Star Wars and then Disney saving Star Wars. And we can get into that a little bit more if we want to go into the movies, but most of that is around, I have very mixed feelings surrounding Disney's trilogy for the ending of the Skywalker saga, but I do not have mixed feelings about The Mandalorian at all, and I think that the announced shows coming to Disney Plus look good and have me excited to see them.
Oh yeah.
So it's very strange to be fondly reminiscent of the original Star Wars trilogy, very reticently reminiscent of the prequel trilogy, and very uncertain of the most recent finalization of the Skywalker saga, yet extremely excited about what they're doing with The Mandalorian. Yeah.
Well, so the end of The Mandalorian sort of kicked some things off in my household. I'm glad they finished that story arc. There are a few episodes that felt like they took away from the story of the Mandalorian, whose name escapes me at the moment, and the child Grogu. And I'm really glad that the last few episodes of season 2 have been basically a progression of that storyline. And the way they ended the last episode, the way they ended this story arc was fantastic. I was really pleased with how they did that.
I was trying to look up real quick. I know that it's Den something.
Yeah.
And I can't remember the pronunciation of the last name.
It's 2 Ds, I think. That's the first name. It's alliteration there.
Mando is what we have known him for forever anyway.
Right. Mando and Baby Yoda.
Yeah. Warning, spoilers ahead. From this point forward in this episode, spoilers for The Mandalorian will be divulged. If you have not completed Season 2 of The Mandalorian and do not want to hear spoilers, stop this episode now and come back to it after you have completed Season 2 of The Mandalorian. Warning, spoilers ahead. You know, it's funny. When we watched the final episode and they were talking about a lone X-wing, like my initial thought was, "Oh no, don't tell me they're going to do that." But it wasn't in a fearful sense. It was like, can this really be happening? Kind of sense. Like it was actually excitement that it might be what I thought, because in the timeline, the only Jedi that we know of for sure that would be flying around in an X-wing would be Luke, and so it was.
Yeah, so we should say I think you'll need to go in before this segment starts and put in a spoiler alert.
Yeah, sure, I will. But at the same time, like if you're listening to us, I really don't care if you haven't seen it or not. You should just assume spoilers.
Yeah, I meant to say that there spoiler alerts are going to fall, or I meant to give a spoiler alert. But
yeah, I'll go back and add one in and add a moment or two of silence just in case.
So yeah, prior to that episode, I talked, I think even on this podcast, about how the last few seconds, the depiction of Darth Vader in Rogue One, it's my favorite segment in all of the any Star Wars related video, at least official. You can't, Rogue One's not canon, but it's official. So yeah, that segment where Darth Vader is ruthlessly attacking all of the rebel soldiers is amazing to me. Like I feel like they embodied and showed Darth Vader, and it's so sad to me that we can't make Darth Vader look like that through the entire saga. And honestly, there's just so much in those few seconds, and the way they portrayed Luke, I think they got it right as well. Like they got Darth Vader so right, and then they got Luke so right.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I can say about The Mandalorian as a whole is that the portrayal of Ahsoka and then following that up with the portrayal of Luke, you get a sense that the Jedi were these skilled fighters that we had always heard about, but never really saw presented to us on the screen in the way that they were talked about in the written variations of the canon.
Well, I can remember being really wowed by Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan and Darth Maul in the Phantom Menace. I can remember being like, oh my god. And in my head, the way I could maintain a willing suspension of disbelief is that because Luke was trained more or less by Obi-Wan briefly and Yoda briefly, that the skill that a Jedi had was lost. It was lost when all the Jedi were destroyed, and that was the way, after seeing the Phantom Menace, that was how I maintained a willing suspension of disbelief and made those two very different worlds, or those two very different fighting styles, coexist in my mind. And now it's all destroyed because Rogue One ruined everything, and I was like, yeah, I have to let it go. I'm actually the fighting in the lightsaber battles in the Phantom Menace and actually the prequels are fresh on my mind because after watching The Mandalorian, my kids were really into okay, let's watch all the Star Wars movies. They'd seen the Harmy's despecialized version 5 years ago, so they were 3 and 4 years old. And I just remember them loving Darth Vader. They thought Darth Vader was the coolest. They had watched it that way, and I refused. I did not recognize the existence of the prequels, and this was before the Force Awakens came out. So they got to watch the 100% of the Star Wars movies that existed, which were Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. That's it. No other movies existed. And so now, they've known better for years now. They know that the other ones existed, but I never suggested watching it. And they finally asked to watch it, and so we watched those 3 this week. And those lightsaber battles are fresh in my mind, and they're not as good as they were 21 years ago. The lightsaber battles, those movies do not hold up. They weren't good to begin with, but even the coolest parts don't hold up anymore.
Just from an effect standpoint or from a choreography standpoint
Both.
as well?
Definitely. I remember definitely from an effects standpoint, the effects did not hold up. Even 10 years ago, the effects weren't holding up. You can see there was a lot of bad lighting for the green screens. or at least the lighting and the green screens are very obvious now. But the choreography no longer holds up. Like, there's better choreographed lightsaber fights on YouTube by amateurs than exist in those movies.
Yeah, I agree. I just wasn't sure exactly whether you were referencing the overly computer-generated aspect of pretty much the entire film, or if it was very specifically the way the fight ensued. I haven't watched the prequels in quite some time. I have fond memories of the final battle between Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan and Darth Maul, because it was just so phenomenal at the time. But I know I haven't watched it, I don't know, in like a decade.
Yeah, I don't think it holds up anymore. Because like the last time I watched it was like around 10 years ago, and watching it now, it doesn't hold up. Where I think like how we saw Luke portrayed at the end of The Mandalorian, which, oh my God, I wasn't expecting that at all, and how Darth Vader was portrayed at the end of Rogue One, I think those will hold up for a very long time. I don't think it's going to get better than that. And the way Ahsoka was fighting in the episode with her, so good. Loved it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that spin-off series. Well, I don't know if you would really call it a spin-off. I guess technically, because she was introduced in The Mandalorian, it would be a spin-off.
Yep.
I mean, realistically, Ahsoka has been a part of general Star Wars canon for a while, since her introduction in the Clone Wars.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's almost kind of inevitable if you're going to expand the Star Wars universe as far as stories go, that you would include her because she's played such a pivotal part there.
Yeah, I think you could call it a spinoff because this particular show is a spinoff of The Mandalorian. Just like you could say the book of Boba Fett is going to be a spinoff of The Mandalorian, even though Boba Fett is in Empire Strikes Back, which is only the second movie. You know, his character's been around for longer than any of the other characters, at least to the general public. I guess his character's been around the longest, but I would call his show a spinoff.
Well, his character's been around the second longest, technically, from the characters that we've been introduced to. Yeah. So I guess it depends on when you were introduced to Luke, if you were introduced to him through the original trilogy, or if you were introduced to him through The Mandalorian.
Well, I would say Luke was introduced before. Like, Luke was introduced first. Boba Fett was second, in as far as the characters that appear in The Mandalorian.
I will say it's been great seeing Boba Fett get some sort of story fleshed out. I've loved what they've done with the character.
I do too. I think it's been really good, and it made watching Attack of the Clones slightly more bearable. Just knowing that little boy was going to be in The Mandalorian, like his character was going to be in The Mandalorian. I thought that was pretty cool. I'd forgotten how Jango Fett died, and so it was cool to see Boba Fett. Just to think about like what's like be able to talk to my kids about. Hey, you remember when we saw that's Boba Fett right there as a kid. That's how he came to be. I thought that was pretty cool. And that's what really what drove us watching. They wanted to see more Star Wars because they got really excited about The Mandalorian, like I said, and how it ended, and they got excited about seeing Boba Fett, and me trying to explain to them Boba Fett's backstory, so that it made them want to watch the movies.
So along those lines, have you watched all of the Clone Wars, or any significant number of the episodes?
I've only seen bits and pieces of it. I have not watched. I wouldn't say that I've watched any of it. I've seen some episodes that my kids were watching, so they know more about the Clone Wars than I do. And I've thought about going and watching it just to fill in the gaps. Just because I've heard that the Clone Wars and I think is it Rebels
is the other one.
Both of those have been anybody who's ever told me about them said, yeah, it's better than the prequels, which makes sense to me.
Yeah, I haven't finished out Rebels. And I actually haven't finished out Clone Wars either, but I've seen the majority of the episodes of both. The whole line of questioning, though, was just whether or not you had been introduced to Katie Sackhoff's character prior to The Mandalorian, or if this was your introduction to Bo-Katan.
No, I was not familiar with Bo-Katan. But I was familiar with Ahsoka.
Okay. Just interesting to see how that falls, because I know I tend to immerse myself more in the universe surrounding it's now referred to as Legends, what used to be the expanded universe. Then you have, and so some of the stories I'm familiar with from there, which may or may not be reflective of the actual official story at this point. But Bo-Katan was another Easter egg that was just great to see brought to life. And I'm really curious how the next season of The Mandalorian is going to go.
Which one is Bo-Katan?
Katie Sackhoff's character, the one that was searching for Moff Gideon to get the Darksaber to reunite or restore the rule of the Mandalorians.
Yeah, I had not really like how you're describing her is like, ooh, cool Easter egg. I had no idea. Like, I just thought, hey, it's a Mandalorian. Like, whereas I knew who Ahsoka was from passing by, watching, an episode here or there of the Clone Wars, and I knew that there was significance. I knew that the character was going to be significant because Rosario Dawson. They got Rosario Dawson to portray her, and that's I'd say an A-level actor.
Yeah, it's not someone you would bring in for a cameo for sure.
Right. Whereas like Bill Burr?
Yeah.
He's a great cameo character.
So going back to the second season of The Mandalorian, just general thoughts and impressions, not necessarily focused on the way they wrapped it up, but as compared to season one, what'd you think as a season? Like, did it meet expectations, exceed expectations, fall short of expectations?
Setting aside the razzle-dazzle of the last few episodes, especially the last episode, just wrapping up the story, I thought it was good. I thought I liked the way the first season ended. I love I loved seeing Giancarlo Esposito as Moff Gideon. I thought that was a great choice. I didn't realize how many things he was in until recently. It sort of like came together. I ended up watching a lot of things that he happened to be in, but the first thing that I ever noticed was his character in Breaking Bad, and just seeing him be like portray the evilness of the Empire at the end of season one, I thought was really good choice. And then the way they wrapped it up with getting Baby Yoda to a Jedi, I thought was really cool. I thought it was good. The first, I think there was like maybe one or two episodes that felt like, oh, is this going to be another thing where they're just making the story extend a little bit longer? And I don't know. I felt like after like the third episode, it was a good flow, because like the sand dragon episode and the frog baby episode, I thought were just like filler episodes that, if there had been more of episodes like that, I felt like that would have detracted from the season. And I felt like that for the first season had a few episodes like that as well. So otherwise it was I thought a solid season.
Yeah, I think both of those episodes really served more to flesh out the characters in some fashion in a way that made more sense when you take the season as a whole than looking at the episodes individually. My big concern is that for 2 seasons now we've had the relationship and interaction surrounding the Mandalorian and Grogu being the focus and the kind of central point of the story arc. And I can see a couple of different ways that it can move forward from here, especially with Bo-Katan not getting the dark saber for whatever reason. I mean, it doesn't necessarily stand well that she has to win it via combat and not just take it, because then how did Moff Gideon get it to begin with? But those are kind of unanswered questions, right? So I can see how they can make the story evolve and focus more on this idea of the Mandalorian and what his values and what his focus is on going forward. I just wonder if that's going to be enough, or if we've come to rely too much on the interactions with Grogu to drive interest and attachment to what happens in each episode. Only time's going to tell.
Honestly, I think you could compare Grogu to Jar Jar Binks. Jar Jar Binks was created to get buy-in from kids. Like, my kids love Jar Jar Binks. When I saw The Phantom Menace I was 17, and I hated Jar Jar Binks. Like, I think he's the worst Star Wars character. There's no worse character in the Star Wars universe than Jar Jar Binks. Like, the little eye that pops up in the trash bin in Star Wars, better character.
I'm going to have to think on that one. My initial thought is to agree, but I take that as a challenge to try to come up with
I was hoping you would. But like, the comparison is Grogu is the same thing, except for it was executed so much better. And it grabbed more people in than Jar Jar did. Jar Jar is good for the kids. Anakin in a similar way was good for the kids. Anakin in the pod race, totally aimed at like kids that are not yet teenagers, and it served its purpose, but the rest of us had to sit through that rubbish. And Baby Yoda as a storytelling device is the perfect culmination of all those things. He's cute, he's funny, and he spans like all the age brackets. So I think he serves that purpose really well. I think he'll be missed, but I don't think people were coming back for Baby Yoda.
I'm sure there were a handful that were, just because there's always that small segment of the population that fits an odd interest that we don't necessarily take into account. But I do agree that I think that most of it was to get you invested and interested in the surrounding characters. And then at this point, the interest is in those other characters and what they're going to do next, not the fate of Grogu.
Yeah, you started all, you watched the first few episodes to see Baby Yoda, and you keep watching him because it's a good story and the characters are interesting and cool stuff happens in it. So I don't think a third season with no Baby Yoda is going to be. I don't think we'll see it. I don't think the creators will see a dip in viewership.
Yeah, I think it's more a matter of just unanswered questions on what transpires with him between now and his seemingly obvious demise, since we know that he doesn't show up in later iterations of the timeline, though that doesn't mean necessarily that he didn't survive and make it somewhere else. It just,
he's not a part of the story.
The assumption is there. Yeah. So does that mean you're going to go back into rewatching the original trilogy next, or are you going to skip to the Disney, the finalization of the Skywalker trilogy?
Oh no, they need to rewatch the trilogy, and we'll do the Harmy's despecialized edition as well. We'll do that again. I mean, at some point I'm gonna have to explain to them how those three were mutilated in the late 90s, but they need to live in my world. I want them to grow up the way that I grew up, with Han shooting first, not having. Go ahead.
That makes the character so much more poignant. Like,
yes,
it detracts so much from his character to not have him shoot first.
I mean, I don't. Like, I was okay when they added the Jabba the Hutt scene.
Yeah, when he steps on his tail and
yeah, I was okay with that, but like changing the shooting sequence it's blasphemous. I think I saw a picture of Harrison Ford wearing a shirt that said Han shot first.
Yeah.
I think there's a whole exchange between him and Lucas about that as well.
Yeah, I would be okay with the special editions in their entirety if that one scene was reverted to the non-special edition version.
Me too. And I kind of like have been thinking about go ahead and watching just doing Star Wars as the despecialized edition and watching the other two on Disney Plus, watching Empire and Return of the Jedi on Disney Plus, but I don't know. I'm okay. Like, I'm okay with the other changes they made. Like, I feel like they're kind of weird changes to some extent. But I mean, like I think they put Hayden Christensen in place of whatever actor was Anakin Skywalker at the end of Return of the Jedi when Obi-Wan and Yoda and then Anakin show up. I think they've replaced that with Hayden Christensen. Yeah.
They did. And that one I can at least somewhat see. I mean, I don't like it because I didn't grow up with that version, but from a continuity perspective, it makes sense.
See, from a continuity perspective, I could argue that it doesn't make sense because they didn't stick his face in at the end of Return of the Jedi before Vader dies. But we know when he asks Luke to take the helmet, it's like, okay, I'm assuming that's the same actor.
I'm not sure if it is or isn't, but I could also make the case that at that point he was so mutilated. Like, could you really tell? Or I guess more the point is that the Force Ghost presentation would be probably the last recognizable self-representation, I guess, from a mental standpoint, is the argument that you would make.
Oh, I would make, if I was arguing with myself, that's exactly the argument I would make, and then I would go ahead and concede. I agree, and I have an aversion to Hayden Christensen because I don't think he's a bad actor. Like, I've heard that he actually acts his acting skills are much better than seen in those movies in Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, which tells me it's bad directing. And
well, I think you can see that if you just look at the entire surrounding cast. Like, I definitely think Ewan McGregor is a good actor, and Natalie Portman is a good actor.
Yeah.
And Samuel L. Jackson is a good actor, and none of their performances felt good in
Liam Neeson.
any of the Star Wars films. Yeah.
That's exactly the argument I'd make. It's not the actor. But because it's the first and only things I've ever seen Hayden Christensen in, I have an aversion to him. You know, I saw Samuel L. Jackson in other movies before Star Wars. I've seen Liam Neeson in other movies. I've seen Ewan McGregor in other movies. I've seen Natalie Portman in other movies. All movies I've seen before and after that where they shine as actors. So I don't have an aversion to them. I'm just like, it was real shit in this movie. Jimmy Smits is terrible in Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. And yeah. Anyway, even going back and watching the first Star Wars movie, the acting's not great. It got real good with Empire Strikes Back, and that's because Empire Strikes Back was not directed by George Lucas.
Yes, and Return of the Jedi was not directed by Lucas.
You know, when I watched Return of the Jedi, it was my favorite for a long time, but I don't care for the Ewoks anymore.
I don't have the aversion to the Ewoks that most people do. I think it's just because at the time I was young enough that I liked them and I wanted my own Ewok to play with.
Yeah, there's an episode of How I Met Your Mother that talks about, it's got a name and I don't remember what the name is. I'll have to look it up for next week. But it's basically, if you were old enough there's a certain age that you'd be that there's no way you could see Return of the Jedi as a child. You hate the Ewoks, just like I hate Jar Jar Binks. Like, I can remember when I liked the Ewoks. I now just don't care for the Ewoks. But I don't hate them like I hate Jar Jar Binks. But there's a whole thing where there's the theory is like, if you're old enough where you saw Ewoks as above the age of a child, like a teenager, then you hate the Ewoks.
I could see that because it's a lot like a number of the different storylines throughout all the movies where I wouldn't necessarily say they add much to the film. Like, you could completely change those segments to be something else entirely and portray the same thing with less screen time, which would make better use of the time from a screenplay and cinematic perspective. But as a kid, I loved the Ewoks. So I certainly understand using them as a mechanism to continue interest from a wider audience than you would get otherwise.
Totally. I mean, the Ewoks, Jar Jar Binks, and Grogu, they all serve the same purpose. Some are just good execution, some are not. And even Anakin in The Phantom Menace serves as I mean, he's pivotal for the story, but he serves that purpose as well. But I feel like the Ewoks like Jar Jar Binks and Anakin as a child don't take away from the story so much as the Ewoks do. I feel like the Ewoks, they come in, with the exception of using, tree trunks to smash the ATSTs, and using tree trunks to, setting up those booby traps. I felt they were they take away from the Return of the Jedi because they're Ewoks. They're killing stormtroopers, and stormtroopers already don't have a good reputation for being good at being troopers. Like, they're supposed to be scary, and they're just not as scary as they should be. And the Ewoks don't help that.
Yeah, I get that. I kind of disagree, though, because I feel like Jar Jar detracts more from the story as a whole than the Ewoks do when you consider the Ewoks as a mechanism for being able to present a kind of guerrilla warfare tactical approach to making it into the bunker. Even though the best they did was, throwing rocks and stones, and it just kind of, it emphasized the disparity between how the stormtroopers should be and how they were actually portrayed. But without them, you have nothing but a traditional frontal assault on that bunker because that was the only option that was available. So they were a mechanism to do that and a mechanism to isolate Luke and Leia for a conversation. Granted, you could also turn around and make the counter argument there are better ways to do that. And I would probably concede that argument pretty quickly. But I feel like it felt more conducive to moving the story forward than Jar Jar's interactions to moving the story forward in episode 1.
I agree with that. I do. And I guess my problem is execution. Like, I was thinking about, if you were writing this as a novel, you could make the Ewoks really scary. You could make the Ewoks and the stormtroopers a lot scarier than they were. Thinking about Rogue One, I feel like the stormtroopers are not incompetent.
Oh no, they were portrayed much better in Rogue One than they were following that, and they were even portrayed better. Well, I guess technically they were the First Order troopers in the finale, the final Skywalker trilogy segment. But they were even portrayed better there than they were in the original trilogy. Yes,
I mean, there's that famous shot of the stormtrooper walking into the door in the Death Star.
Yeah.
So
I mean, the one where he failed to duck low enough to clear.
Yeah, and it's just like the actor couldn't see out of the helmet, and it made it into the final cut of the movie. And it's just why the hell didn't he edit that out in '97? You know?
Well, I think most of it is because he viewed them, and I should clarify, we're talking now about Lucas is that he. I think he viewed them as slightly more comedic than what we viewed them as. And it just did not translate well because he is not a comedy genre director.
No, it just detract. You know, it's just things that we can. I would call it more than nitpicking. It's just things that take away from. You're trying to tell a cool story, and this little thing, you're trying to also be cute, and that sort of takes away. You need to pick one or the other. There's a way to be cute, obviously, and tell a good story. You know, Grogu is just that. But watching the prequels, it's watching the clones soldiers. They're like way better than the stormtroopers, and I assume, correct me if I'm wrong, but my assumption is that the clones become stormtroopers. Is that correct?
There's a little bit of disparity there. What we know of the timeline, as far as what has now been considered official, the clones were not translated into just corresponding ranks of stormtroopers. The clones were used to be kind of the initial idea of the Imperial forces to execute Order 66, and then were subsequently turned on because of the lack of trust in clones. And so stormtroopers were to our knowledge, all stormtroopers were human because of the Imperial distrust of alien races, but they were conscripted from just random families, and so it was taken at an early age, and trained and put into service.
Okay, that would explain that disparity, because I was going to say the clone troopers were better than the storm. I feel like better than the stormtroopers in 4, 5, and 6.
The big problem, just to interject real quick, is that there's still a huge gap between 1, 2, and 3 and 4, 5, and 6 in the timeline where we don't really know what's happened, because the expanded universe had plenty of theories and, of course, were written about and explored, but all of that has since been eradicated.
Right.
So as far as we know, the clones maybe were given an option to become stormtroopers, but we know that with the First Order, those were conscripted, and there's reference to that being the way stormtroopers had been done previously as well. And so it seems like there was still this purge, so to speak, and conscription and training. Excuse me. And it sounds like that is the general idea still, but we don't really know that. It's all theory and hypothesis at this point.
That makes sense, because there's a 17-year gap.
And you could also explain the disparity in performance over that 17 years, where if you're training an entirely new force, of course they wouldn't be as good.
Yeah.
And so I could see if they ever flesh out what happened between the first 3 and episodes 4, 5, and 6, maybe that explains why the stormtroopers in 4, 5, and 6 don't seem to be as up to par, because there's, a 30-year gap between 6 and 7?
That sounds about right.
I don't know if it's quite that large, but it's definitely significant.
It's twice. We could say twice as long.
Yeah, and so it would make sense that
maybe not quite twice as long, but
yeah, and so it would make sense that the First Order troopers were better prepared and better trained than the original wave of stormtroopers in 4, 5, and 6. But it still doesn't feel right. It doesn't quite satisfy that narrative, because if you have this clone army that is performing well and is apparently executing your orders as you expect them to, why would you then think they were unreliable? And the only thing I can figure is there may be something in the Clone Wars that explains that as well. And if not, then it's just unanswered questions.
I guess, if it's quote-unquote unanswered, you could simply say that they were all killed. I mean, that's a boring but plausible explanation. They were all killed in battle at some point. They all were killed or died.
Yeah, it seems like it's an overly easy way out of it, though. I have a feeling eventually they'll try to fill in some of those gaps a little bit, and the answer will kind of fall in line with a number of clones managed to either break free of or fight against the brainwashing or pre-programming.
Yeah.
And so they were deemed unreliable, and then you can move forward from there. And I think that kind of fits in with the introduction of the Dark Troopers and the Mandalorian being a revision that is completely droid.
Yeah.
And no human driving them. Because in the expanded universe, the Dark Troopers were human. They were just ruthless and quite capable.
Right. I enjoyed the Dark Troopers. I thought they were a lot of fun. It was fun to see. It was fun to see the Mandalorian put through his paces, fighting the Dark Troopers, fighting the one Dark Trooper, and then I really, I've been kind of like eager to talk about this, but just here's the big spoiler alert. Stop if you haven't watched it, but watching Luke rip through them. Like, it was so fun to see the lightsaber used correctly like that. Like, the only thing we had similar where lightsabers were going through droids, and I wanted to mention this as well, is in the prequels. You have the Federation droids that were the enemy, and they're even more inept than the stormtroopers in 4, 5, and 6. And I mean, they were a lot of fun to watch get cut in half and so forth. And the only way they did well is because of their sheer numbers, and maybe the destroyer droids that would roll in with the shields. They were pretty cool, but the rest of them were pretty inept. And I never really thought about them being comic relief, but like looking back and with those glasses on, it's like, oh yeah, they were supposed to be comic relief. They just made the movie bad. So it was nice to see like formidable android troopers, show. It's like we've had 2 seasons of The Mandalorian showing like, he's a really good fighter. Like there aren't a lot of worthy opponents, and then you have these Dark Troopers, and he's struggling to defeat just one. And then you get Luke running through the ship and just like slicing through like it's nothing, and just destroying all of them. That was so cool. And I kept thinking, when watching Rogue One, they showed the back of Leia. And I really take issue with how they handled Leia in Rogue One. I felt like the delay between this is obviously Princess Leia, and then showing her face was too long. It's like you either just need to show me her face or you need to not show the face at all. And in Rogue One, I thought they shouldn't have shown her face at all. And in The Mandalorian with Luke Skywalker, the same thoughts came to me. It's like, are we going to see his face? And it was a long time before you actually see his face. But they did it really well. They did, they showed actual shots of him going through and destroying Dark Troopers. But they started out with surveillance, characters in the bridge looking at surveillance video of him going through and destroying the Dark Troopers. I thought that was the mix of the surveillance video and the reactions of those characters and actually showing him. I thought that was a cool mix. And they sort of teased, are we going to see who this is? Because it could only be Luke. And when they got him into the bridge, when he got to the bridge, they did not. I felt like the wait between him appearing at the bridge and seeing his face and hearing his dialogue was not. I didn't think it was bad. I thought it was the timing was right on that, and I thought it was great. I thought they did a really good job, and that was Mark Hamill. I believe that was Mark Hamill lending his voice. I know he's got a credit in the show, so I'm assuming maybe they actually even like had him standing there. I don't know. I haven't gone to look to see the details of that. If you do know, that'd be great. But I just think they handled showing a young Luke Skywalker again really well. Whereas I think they kind of messed up a little in Rogue One. It's forgivable, but they should have picked one, and I think they picked the wrong way of handling Leia.
I think one of the big problems with Rogue One was timing. It was just too close to the unfortunate passing of Carrie Fisher, where it was very prominent in mind, and it jarred you out of what they were trying to portray. And maybe I'm wrong, but I know for me it was very close in proximity to
It was.
when she passed, and then I saw Rogue One, and it was just like, no, it's too soon for you to be trying to portray this character. But I do agree, and I also have some similar issues with the way they did Tarkin in Rogue One.
Yes.
Because he was completely computer generated. And I think it was passable. I don't think it was done bad. I just felt like it pulled me a little bit out of the story because I knew that he wasn't there.
See, I was watching it and I was like, he looks really the same. I was like, I would expect him to look so much older. I was like, he must be dead. And like, I was just confused. Like the CG, like looking at it and saying, "Oh, that's CG." You did a really fantastic job with your CG. Like, but I was confused.
Yeah, and I think it's something that probably won't be an issue for most people watching it. I think it's just for those of us who knew the actors or characters well enough, it just jarred us out of the experience of the movie itself. Maybe not necessarily with the timing on when they decided to show Leia's face in Rogue One, because I do agree that the timing there was off. But I also, because it was so fresh in my mind that Carrie Fisher had passed, I'm never going to be able to separate that from when I first saw the movie. So I couldn't tell you from an objective standpoint if I would feel different watching it now.
I wanted to look up the exact timing of that. I know that Rogue One was in the cinema in December of 2016. I remember going and seeing it, and Carrie Fisher died December 27th, 2016. So yeah, the timing was really bad. I mean, like the pacing of the shots in the movie, objectively, they teased too long not showing her face, and I thought it would have been nice if they hadn't. Or if the fact that they were going to show the CG face of Carrie Fisher, they waited too long. They teased for too long, and I think with that long of a tease, they just needed to not show her face at all. But because they did show her face, that timing should have been shorter. But on top of that, yeah, I didn't even remember that until you said it. I didn't even remember that Carrie Fisher had just passed away, and I can remember feeling so. I now remember feeling so sad when I saw that. I was like, "She's gone. That's not her."
Yeah, and it certainly made it that much more poignant to watch The Last Jedi. Yeah, and to think about the titles for a moment. I knew it was Episode 8, but I couldn't remember for sure which title was which.
Yeah.
Because my understanding is that Episode 9 was supposed to focus even more on her than it did. And I know they had to reuse a lot of other footage and kind of piece things together from a dialogue perspective to even finish out Episode 9. And there were places where you can kind of tell that it doesn't feel as natural as you would think. But I thought they did a decent enough job with it. I didn't feel pulled out of it like I did Rogue One.
Well, and to be fair, Rogue One was released 11 days before she passed away. So it's not like they knew that was coming. And it's just so if you'd seen it like in that 11-day period, I would, if I'd seen it in that 11-day period, I would have been just like, yeah, the timing was bad and how they portrayed it. I was gonna say, interestingly, like side note, I didn't realize that Carrie Fisher's mom was Debbie Reynolds. Do you know Debbie Reynolds?
I do.
I loved Singing in the Rain, and it was kind of like shocking to me to find out that Debbie Reynolds was Carrie Fisher's mom. And it was like similarly kind of like, unexpected to find out that Billie Lourd is Carrie Fisher's daughter. And if I'm not mistaken, Debbie Reynolds passed away the day after Carrie Fisher died.
I don't remember for sure. I know it was close, but I don't remember the timing.
Yeah, it was like very close. Yeah, it's the day after.
And I know Billie Lourd lended her presence for staging, I think, for something in episode 9. I'll have to go back and look. I remember a headline coming up that talked about leveraging her ability to kind of stand in as a placeholder for something, and I don't remember if it was actually something that was used in the film or if it was just a thought on how they might go about it. I may or may not actually follow up on that.
I was gonna say, I think she has a credit. Like, I think she actually has a credit in the movies.
I know she does because she did play one of the other rebels.
Okay, I didn't realize. I haven't watched. Like, I watched the what's the 8th movie?
So 7 is Force Awakens,
Yep.
8's Last Jedi,
Okay.
9 is
The Rise of Skywalker.
Rise of Skywalker.
I stopped watching The Last Jedi when they show the origin of the blue juice, the blue milk.
Yeah, I have issues with The Last Jedi, not from a cinematic standpoint, but from a continuity standpoint. Like, I think Rian Johnson is a good director, and I think that he was attempting to kind of upend some of the story components to reset, thought processes all around the characters in general. I don't think it fit well. And especially when you had Abrams end up doing both other sides of that, it just doesn't, there's no continuity between 7, 8, and 9. And they don't feel like they flow together. And I think that's my big problem with 8.
I just wasn't into it, and I will watch it with my kids. So it's, when we get to those movies together, like, I'm going to sit down and watch all, we'll do a proper movie night, popcorn, lights out, that sort of thing. I'll say the prequels were bad enough that when we were watching Revenge of the Sith, they decided, like, halfway through that movie, they wanted to play on their iPads while it was playing in the background. Like, they're 8 and 9 years old, and they're like, can we play on our iPads? And I was like, do you want to finish watching this movie? Yeah, we do. I was like, and you want to play on? Yeah, okay. I understand that. I get it. This movie is that bad. You want to know what happens in the story, but you don't want to have to focus on it.
Yeah. Well, it's like most of my issues with 8 are that everything we knew about Luke prior to that film do not fit the character portrayed in that film. And so if you're going to take that arc, you have to sell that arc to me. And that's where it falls short. Like, I can come up with ways that you could sell it and it would be okay, but you didn't do it. And so it just doesn't feel right, and it doesn't fit everything else.
I bet Quentin Tarantino could have done it.
I think Rian Johnson could have done it if he had just added more to the film. Like, it feels like they could have added 5 or 10 minutes, somewhere interspersed throughout the build-up to everything that was present, and I could have been okay with it. I can think of a number of ways it could be done, because at the end of the film, well, you haven't seen past that, so we'll bookmark that. It'll be something that we can explain why I could be okay with it once you've gone back and watched it and we have a proper follow-up.
I just want my Quentin Tarantino directed Star Wars something. Like written and
I
directed.
can understand.
Written and directed. I just want to see what he would do with a lightsaber.
I mean, if Kill Bill's any indication, I would love to see a Tarantino Star Wars
what
film.
I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. I mean, here's the thing about Quentin Tarantino and how he would be, how his storytelling, would lend itself so well to Star Wars. Star Wars was born in the 70s. So Quentin Tarantino has a lot of 70s influence in his movies. He's great with Westerns. Star Wars is based on Westerns. Star Wars is based on dogfights. Quentin Tarantino loves to cut people up with katana blades. The lightsaber, like in that scene in Pulp Fiction, spoiler alert, the scene in I know
we don't need a spoiler alert for Pulp Fiction. If you haven't watched it.
I know it's 26 years old. I know it's 26 years old, but I still get like The Usual Suspects is 25 years old. I still give spoiler alerts for Kaiser Soze.
Yeah, but The Usual Suspects isn't as mainstream as Tarantino has become.
That's fair. In my head, Tarantino is mainstream, but I know he's not. But he's mainstream in my head. Anyway, I'm basic that way. He's that scene in the I guess it's a pawn shop where the Gimp is in the basement and he grabs this item that he could fight with, and then he sees this other thing and he grabs that item, and he finally gets to a chainsaw. And then when he puts the chainsaw down to get something else, you're like, oh, what the hell did he just... Because they don't show you until he gets down into the basement. And they're like, what the hell did he pick up that's worse than a chainsaw? And it's a katana. And I was like, yeah, I think a katana blade would be worse than a chainsaw, even though it seems like a chainsaw might be. Chainsaw's just really messy. Whereas the katana, I think, is a lot more deadly. The next step up from a katana is obviously a lightsaber.
Yeah, I mean, you certainly don't have to sell me on Tarantino doing a Star Wars film. It's just, I don't think it's ever going to happen.
No, I don't think he would. I can't. It doesn't seem like something he would pursue, and it doesn't seem like it's something Disney would pursue. Disney definitely wouldn't pursue it, but I'm gonna dream that until somebody dies.
Well, I think the main thing is that he wants more creative control over the output. Mm-hmm. And I do think Disney, well, I think some aspect of Disney, whether it's actually Disney as a whole or if it's the remaining Lucasfilm executives or what, but there's some controlling entity that has too much leverage over what the story is going to be for Tarantino to jump onto a project.
It's Kathleen. Her name is Kathleen Kennedy.
I wasn't going to necessarily call her out because I don't know for sure. I know that that's where the rumors are. But at the same time, I mean, Favreau's been able to work within whatever constraints have been imposed and provide just pure delight. Granted, he has a very different style, very different approach, and so I can certainly make the argument that he's just more suited to Kennedy's vision for Lucasfilm.
I was just going to say, if you look at Favreau's portfolio, it's like this fits. If you look at Tarantino's portfolio, it's like we want things to be PG-13 so that we can get a lot of money. We want kids. We want it to be relatively family friendly because we're Disney. It's got to be PG-13. You're never going to give us a PG-13 Star Wars movie. Like, we're going to be like working on getting it down from X to R.
Fair enough.
So, or actually, they don't use X anymore. They use NC-17. We should do a quick. I'll put that in the notes for next week.
Hold on. They don't use X anymore at all?
No. I went down this rabbit hole after watching Showgirls on your Plex library. This is the second time I've thought about Showgirls during this show tonight. The first time was when we were talking about the quality of actors that sucked in the prequels. Made me think of this scene in Showgirls where it's like, I know Elizabeth Berkley is not the best actress, but oh my God, director, that's the cut that you were okay with making it into the final film. I was like, you must have just been like really needing to get off set that day. There's just a scene where...
Well, depending on the scene, I mean, it could have also just been, well, that's the one that showed enough skin to be acceptable.
Oh, it wasn't even that kind of scene.
Okay.
It was a dialogue scene, and I was just like, I can't believe if I was watching the movie, I could point it out to you, but I can't remember what the scene was. But I was just like, that's the one you thought, oh, this will go great in a movie. And it made Elizabeth Berkley look bad as an actress, and she's not that bad. It was worse than the I'm so excited, I'm so afraid, that famous scene in Saved by the Bell. Anyway, second time I've thought about that movie because I actually went down a Wikipedia rabbit hole looking at MPAA ratings, because X used to be a legitimate MPAA rating, and it was more or less replaced by NC-17. Triple X and 5X were never MPAA ratings. They were just marketing that were used by the porn industry.
Well, yeah. I actually have never seen 5X, so that one's new to me. But I knew that Triple X was never an officially recognized one. It just, I mean, of course it sounds cooler, right?
Right.
3X's, not just one.
Well, it's so funny because now there's that movie 3X or the Triple X with Vin Diesel.
Yeah.
And now at this point, Triple X is legitimate as a 3-letter domain. So the .xxx is a TLD that can be used by the porn industry to sort of segregate those kind of sites from other sites and make it easier for, I guess, blocking with whatever kind of blockers you want to use, maybe DNS blocking. I don't know. But
so I haven't really paid that much attention to MPAA ratings ever, honestly. But when did X go out of favor and NC-17 become just kind of the de facto standard for anything above R?
I believe it was in the 90s with the movie Showgirls. I think Showgirls was there were a number of things that pushed it into that direction. A lot of it was trying to get away from the use of Triple X and the confusion that the use of Triple X brought to the rating system. And so it's been a while since I was reading about this, and that's why I wanted to save it for the next episode so I can go back and do some. I guess at this point it could be follow up. We've talked about it long enough,
and I guess it just illustrates how long I've been just out of touch with what ratings mean anyway, because I haven't paid attention. I mean,
you don't have to.
Yeah,
and it's just there's certain criteria that will push movies into NC-17, and they I think it was Jack Valenti when he was president of the MPAA. I say Jack Valenti like everybody has the same working knowledge of the cartoon Freakazoid. Freakazoid represented animated Jack Valenti quite often as to poke fun at him and the MPAA in that show. And I think also Animaniacs portrayed him a few times. But anyway, during the 90s, I believe during the 90s is when they switched over they dropped official use of the X rating and switched it over to NC-17. NC-17, I feel like NC-17 doesn't sound, like X sounds like, the X is in the word sex and sex is in pornography, and I'm sure it was fun to use that, and there's some sort of cachet that they can use by using that letter of the alphabet as a rating and then like tripling it and making it sound even like more extreme as a way of marketing pornography that the MPAA wanted to get away from. And NC-17 is so dull and boring, but it served its purpose that they switched to that rating.
Yeah, the only I guess, complaint I would have is that you could have a number of things fall into an NC-17 rating that would be equivalent to old school late night Cinemax that I would want to know is rated one way versus something more pornographic being rated a step further. And so if NC-17 just covers everything above R, there's no delineation.
Right. So there is a delineation. There is a the NC-17 does top out. X did top out as well. Like when R and X were ratings, full frontal female nudity was obviously got you an R rating. Always got you an R rating. An erect penis would get you an X rating. A full frontal male nudity with a flaccid penis could be kept in an R rating. And then, there's obviously stuff that NC-17 would top out, and it's like, you don't get a rating, you don't get to be in the movies, you don't get to have an MPAA rating, so movies you're going to have to remove these things before we can even give you an NC-17 rating.
Yeah, I guess that would make sense because not rated did become a bit more popular for director's cuts or
DVD releases.
Yeah.
And it just did, it's like, there's probably stuff in there that it's like when they're releasing the film, they want to get an R rating because you can take children into an R-rated movie. You cannot take children into an NC-17 movie. They will not sell you a ticket for, or they're not allowed. They're supposed to enforce not selling tickets to children under the age of 17 for NC-17, whereas a parent or guardian can purchase a ticket for an R-rated movie for a minor. And so,
as we're talking about it, I do remember in the late 90s there being more of a crackdown on, yes, you can purchase this ticket, or no, you have to have somebody purchase this ticket for you when we were going to theaters.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all kind of ringing a bell, but I didn't realize that it was all intertwined.
I just love rules, man. I just love rules. But I'm not the official source of the history of the ratings, but these are the things that I remember from reading about it because I was interested in it. I know there's a scene that was cut from Robocop that gave the movie an X rating where Robocop shoots the penis off of a rapist. So it's like you have a penis like in the middle of the screen, and it gets mutilated by a bullet going through it. It's not bloody or gory like it would be I would expect it would be in real life. It's just like bits of flesh popping off. I don't recall there being any blood, but I think that actually that might have even pushed it from an X rating to be like, yeah, you can't show this scene in this movie. But I think everything that led up to it was put it in the X category, and then they see the scene where the guy's penis gets blown away, and it's like, oh yeah, no, you don't. This doesn't get to be in the movie. But it is a deleted scene. I guess it's on one of the discs, but it's made its way to YouTube.
Interesting.
It's a bizarre scene.
Yeah, I don't see how that would have added to the film. I get why, from a storyteller,
gratuitous
general.
80s.
Yeah.
Typical 80s gratuity. The other one
it's like Sin City. You could add so much to that wouldn't necessarily add to the story, but it adds to the feeling and flow of the film without necessarily adding anything of any real substance.
See, I feel like Sin City is it's a gritty movie, and I feel like it wouldn't I feel like that movie, if you took that movie back in time to the MPAA in 1985, I don't think they'd give it a rating. I don't think it would make it. Maybe
there's no way it would have.
Right. It's like, as we have more ratings and as ratings have changed and we have the limitations set by ratings, we certainly have pushed everything in the direction of we're allowing more to be created. But I was going to say, like, with Sin City, even though it's what you would consider gratuitous in that movie, is, I feel like, artistic, and it lends itself to the grittiness of the source material, and the what the storyteller subject you to is earned. Whereas, like, the rapist getting his penis blown off in Robocop is just, like, relatively unnecessary. It's just like somebody had an idea, like, let's show this. At best, you could say Robocop is serving justice at a penis level. That would be a fun. I was just gonna say that would be a funny title, but we cannot. But the problem, I was gonna say you could. It feels like it's there for the sake of being there, whereas something like Sin City is like it's earned. It's part of the source material. It is bringing out and fleshing out the source material in a way that was meant to happen or is earned.
Yeah, I don't think I would disagree with anything that you're saying there, because the big thing with Sin City is that you have to establish just how brutal this world is, and if you don't, the rest of the story falls flat.
Yeah, it's like it's earned. It pays homage to the source material. I don't think anybody is arguing against how gritty that movie is. If you don't like it, you shouldn't be watching it, or at least turn your head on during certain scenes. But it is not. It's not a movie that pretends to be an all things to all people. Like, I feel like the Marvel movies, they're all things to all people. It appeals to such a broad range of people, and Star Wars is the same way. It appeals. It's been designed to appeal to a range, like the broadest possible audience, which made me want to, like, several times in our conversations, I've wanted to get into your topic of the ruination and salvation of Star Wars by Disney.
Yeah, and it, it kind of, we've danced around it for enough.
Yeah.
Of the episode in general. Like, it just goes back to the finalization of the Skywalker saga in film has a lot of things that feel right for different sections of the audience, or feel horribly wrong for different sections of the audience, and so it feels like they are loved and hated in equal measure. Whereas the focus on Disney Plus releases, even though we only have The Mandalorian to choose from, really seems to fit the idea of, this is what we want out of the Star Wars universe. We want you to tell stories that we have fun with and we enjoy, and we don't care about trying to tie them to these other things that have existed for years and years and years. And I think that's the biggest thing that kind of shows you can't really tell a cohesive story that spans 30 plus years and expect everyone to love it, because there's too much that influences what we expect or think of those characters that we've become attached to for whatever reason. And then you try to introduce nuance or try to introduce further development or other interesting things, and for some people, they can kind of roll with it and accept it, and for others, it's just completely out of left field and feels wrong, and how could you dare do this to a childhood memory? And then you get something like The Mandalorian that is not, predicated by anything in canon that we have to be concerned about. I guess you could kind of now say that you have to be concerned about Boba Fett and Ahsoka and how they were done previously, but even the introduction of them previously was not in a way that's going to make most people care. I just can't imagine most people are concerned with tying any of the animated series to the live action series from a continuity perspective and feeling like you absolutely have to make it work. Certainly there will be diehards or a number of people who will point to that, super fans, diehards, however you want to describe them, that it may not make sense or may be difficult to reconcile. But the general public isn't going to make the same correlation between them that they do the actual films themselves, because all of the films have been billed as a continuation of the same story.
Yeah, I feel like, in a way, the last three were necessary evils. It's the wrong term, but they had to be made. They had to be made. They had to get them out of the way. They're going to make a ton of money on it. But they needed to close out the story. They needed to say, we're done now. This is the end of the story. We bought the story. We've portrayed it. It's over. And now they can move on to actually making like really interesting things. Like the Mandalorian doesn't have to be a Star Wars. It doesn't have to be Star Wars. Like you can watch it. You can have not watched any Star Wars movie or any Star Wars television show, the animated shows. Watch The Mandalorian and enjoy that show for what it is. There's nothing, it has no prerequisites. And that's been really cool. Like it's made me like Star Wars again. The Last Jedi was like it's very, I'm a completist. Like I will watch bad things to the end, and I couldn't finish that. I couldn't finish The Last Jedi, and I couldn't finish Solo. I was just like, I just am not invested in this. And The Mandalorian was like one of the best shows I've seen.
Yeah, I think there are two things to kind of unpack a little bit there. Prior to the existence of episodes 7, 8, and 9, prior to Disney's acquisition of Lucasfilm, actually, there were 3 books that were generally regarded as the continuation of the Skywalker saga, and most of the expanded universe kind of accepted those as canon, obviously unofficial, but their stories revolved around those being factual. And I think a lot of the dissatisfaction from a number of people was that those stories are not what we got at all, not even close. And so you stick with, if you were someone who read any of the books and kind of paid attention to what was fleshed out with the expanded universe, what you were expecting and what you wanted was completely different than what was delivered. So that's already just a situation where you're setting yourself up for failure. Then you have those who weren't paying attention to it, but felt that Episode 7 was just a rehash of Episode 4, and Episode 8 felt completely different, and then Episode 9 was trying to kind of undo parts of Episode 8 and give you a completion to the story that maybe picked the most obvious way to do it because they didn't have time to do a whole nother movie to take it in a different direction. Like that, the other side of it is that people didn't get a cohesive narrative from all 3 of those episodes. And so both of those things, I think, work against you from a just general enjoyment of the entire saga as a whole. And then you compound that with something like Solo, where this was supposed to be the origin of a beloved character, and the origin story just doesn't match what we know of the character. You know, he was far more naive and desiring to do good than the scoundrel that we met and fell in love with. And so there's a continued discontinuity there,
yeah,
that is difficult to reconcile. And if they had done a better job in Solo of explaining how he got from point A to point B, similar to how Last Jedi did not do a good job of explaining how Luke got from point A to point B. I think it could have been reconciled among those groups and be accepted. And the biggest problem is they just didn't. They took for granted that they would not have to explain what they were presenting and just present the story that they thought they had, where because these characters have existed for so long, we've built up ideas of these characters, around what has officially existed for so long. You've got some explaining to do if you want to take the character in a direction that I don't recognize.
I don't think I ever had articulate thoughts like that about Solo, but yeah, that's. I think that's why I lost complete interest in the movie. Like I loved Danny Glover as Lando, but it wasn't enough. And like while you were describing that, Han Solo was like wasn't the scoundrel that we know him to be in that movie. And if you think about the age of Han Solo in Star Wars and the age of Han Solo in Solo, it's only a few years. There's maybe like 5 years difference, like Han's 7 years difference. Like, I guess a lot can happen to a person in 7 years, but yeah, there's no explanation. And Han Solo in Solo was too much like a farm boy named Luke Skywalker. That was how he was portrayed. And you articulated well what I didn't like about that movie.
Yeah, I will say, going back and watching it and trying to watch it as this doesn't relate to other things that I know kind of movie, it is more enjoyable than trying to watch it as a story about Solo. So I get it, but I do wonder how much of that is just because I want to like it versus I just don't think it's a good film.
I mean, if he was a wholesome farm boy to begin with, we want to see how he became a scoundrel, and that's the story that is compelling. If he was always a scoundrel, we want to see the things that got him to the Millennium Falcon. I mean, it's maybe a little bit less compelling, but we want to see the things that got him to the Millennium Falcon and shooting. His name escapes me first.
Greedo.
And yes, thank you. Want to see how he got there. It's like telling the story of how he and Lando were frenemies, and I didn't, from what I watched of it, I didn't get any of that, and I didn't see it going there. So, yeah, not a great movie, at least as far as telling his story.
I will say that it's pretty telling that of the spin-off films, I want to know more about the Guardians of the Whills from Rogue One than any other characters that have been introduced.
That is telling. That is telling. I mean, I gotta say, if you haven't seen it, the honest trailer for Rogue One is one of the best honest trailers I've ever seen.
Yeah, I've seen it. It's all about how somebody was in dire need of Dropbox.
I love it. Somebody's got a real. I can't remember what he said. I don't want. Somebody's got a real turn on for file formats. That was, I think, one of my favorite lines in that honest trailer.
Yeah, I know it was along those lines. I certainly couldn't quote it at this point.
Yeah. And then the whole thing, he's like, I'm not a Jedi, but you're a Jedi. Like, you're nothing but a Jedi. I can't remember the character's name, but the blind man. He's like, yeah. How can he not be a Jedi?
Well, he's one of the Guardians of the Whills. So yeah. Chirrut, that was Donnie Yen. He was playing Chirrut Imwe, I think is how you pronounce the name. But yes, his character is one that I absolutely would love to see something spin off and developed that takes place prior to Rogue One.
Yeah. So what do you think about the teaser that they gave us at the end of The Mandalorian, sort of telling us that we're going to get to see the book of Boba Fett.
You know, I wasn't entirely certain where they were going with it at first. When they first cut to Bib Fortuna being bloated and large, and then I kind of put together what this probably means, all in the span of a second or two. It was just kind of a surprising transition, and then when they showed Boba Fett enter the frame, it's like, okay, well, I get where this is going. I'm intrigued. I don't really know what that means from a story perspective yet, other than seemingly he's going to take control of the what used to be the Hutt Enterprises on Tatooine. Like, is it going to go beyond that, or is it going to basically just be control of Tatooine as a whole, or what? I don't think they gave us enough to really form a good opinion of what they're going to do with the spinoff, but I'm excited for it. I think anything that they do with Boba Fett as the character that they've shown us in The Mandalorian is going to be good.
Yeah. I thought that scene was great, and that's what got my kids interested in wanting to watch the rest of the Star Wars movies and rewatch the ones that they had seen years ago. That scene right there, not the 8 previous episodes of The Mandalorian, but that scene with Boba Fett. They were really interested in Boba Fett, and because I had to start explaining to them what the significance of that execution was, and so there's a period of time where creators would have created that scene and then never revisited that. Like, they would have told the Boba Fett story, and that scene would have nothing to do with what they're actually going to tell. But I don't think we live in those days anymore, and I think it's gonna be, at least start out about that, lead up to why he's going back to Tatooine and so forth. I think if you go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I don't think anything. I don't recall if Favreau directed the final episode or not. I didn't pay that close attention to the credits, but certainly he had approval in some fashion across the entire production line. I don't think he would stamp his signature of approval on anything that did not indicate where we were going.
I agree. I just don't think movie makers do that anymore. That might have been, I can't remember the time that it could have been it could be something from the 90s where it's like, we'll show you this teaser thing and then it's just to tease you for fun, and it's not actually something we're going to pursue. But there was a period of time where some creators got away with giving you a teaser of something that they'll never pursue for a storyline that is, or for characters that are going to exist. It's like, we're going to tell a story with these characters. Here's a little teaser. We're never going to pursue that story, but it was fun for the teaser. I don't think that exists anymore, but I was reminded of that when watching that. Thoughts of that came back, like those feelings and of that happening in the past came back to me when I saw that.
Yeah, makes sense. I don't recall having overly strong feelings. I know what you're talking about, but I would be hard pressed to point to an example at this point.
I don't think there's any way I could give you an example. I'd have to experience it again. And the thing is, you're probably not going to, because those teaser things, I don't know where they're going to be anymore. So I don't know where I'd find them. So
you were about to say something else too.
I don't know what it is.
Yeah, I had a feeling. I was trying to stall for a moment to see if maybe it came to mind. But, I don't know that I have anything else to add without providing overly significant levels of spoilers for the show in general. But really the big takeaway for me is that I think the future of Star Wars looks bright with Disney Plus, and I'm excited for it.
Yeah, I think so too. I agree, and I'm looking forward to the new shows that are going to be available at the end of next year.
Which one you are looking forward to most?
I think the Book of Boba Fett is it's the one I'm going to look for. I feel like I'm looking forward to most, but that's because I know so little about it's Ahsoku. or Ahsoka?
Ahsoka.
Yeah, I know less about her that I could get excited about. She was very compelling, but Boba Fett was very compelling. Like Boba Fett at the end of The Mandalorian was more compelling than Boba Fett through the rest of the every other presentation of him. And if I'm not mistaken, it's the same actor that was Jango in the prequels.
You know, I didn't look that up. I know that he seemed familiar. Obviously, there's a significant bit of aging from the last time that we saw him, so that would be an interesting correlation.
I'm going to do the real-time follow-up on that.
That'll work. While you do, I'm actually more interested in whatever happens with the Obi-Wan series than I am Boba Fett and Ahsoka, even though I'm interested in all of them. But I know that Ewan McGregor is reprising his role as Obi-Wan for a Disney Plus series, and I'm looking forward to that regardless of which portion of his life they decide to explore.
I forgot that he was going to do that, and that's going to be excellent. We're going to see what Ewan McGregor can do as Obi-Wan, because, you know, as we mentioned before, like those wonderful actors' abilities were squandered in the prequels. And so Temuera Morrison is the actor that portrayed Boba Fett in The Mandalorian, as well as Jango in episodes 2 and 3. And he was really good in The Mandalorian. So I just as he was good in The Mandalorian, I think we'll see Obi-Wan. I think we'll see Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan portraying Obi-Wan much better than he did in the early 2000s.
I certainly hope so. I know, I would imagine this probably hasn't come across your radar. One of the other shows that's been announced takes place prior to the prequels.
Oh.
And I think it's the Old Republic era. I don't remember what they're calling it, but it would be reminiscent of when the Jedi were at the height of their power. I don't necessarily say is the right word, but I'm pretty sure that's what's used. I have refrained from looking much at any details or background, but that seems like the kind of show that could be fun and interesting depending on what they do with it.
You know,
we'll see.
The whole time I was doing chores while the prequels were playing for my kids, I kept thinking about, I wonder what it would have been like. The prequels occur right at the beginning of a major upheaval in the Jedi Order, and I remember kept thinking, it's like how interesting it would be to see what it would have been like when the Jedi are in their prime, at their most significant. And so
there's a Disney Plus show coming for that as well.
Excellent. I was already thinking about it. Didn't even know it was there. Somebody planned ahead for me.
Yeah, and based on just what we know as far as the timelines go, it sounds like they're going to explore pretty much all of the gaps over time. They're just focusing on whatever timeline The Mandalorian is officially set in and prior to the prequels to start.
Oh, I think I know. The Mandalorian is set like somewhere. I don't know that they said in the show or not, but it's just a few years after the events of Return of the Jedi.
Well, we certainly know it's not far off from that, just because of the way Luke is portrayed in the final episode of season 2. I mean, from a just aging perspective and everything else, it can't be far from the events of Return of the Jedi.
No, and I remember even before, and I feel kind of dumb about not putting this together, because in the episode with Ahsoka, she says, you know, some Jedi might find Grogu when you take him to the ancient ruin and so forth, and it didn't even occur to me that one of those Jedis would be Luke, but I knew at that time, well before the episode with Luke, I knew that it was only a few short years after the events of Return of the Jedi, and I can't remember where I saw that, but it was made clear by the creators.
Yeah, it goes back to when Cara Dune was introduced, and they were talking about how the shock troopers, the rebel shock troopers, went from being this force that was, routing out Imperial soldiers to more of a peacekeeping type of force, and that's not what she signed up for. There was that dialogue established in season 1.
Yes. But it was even something else where I think I was just looking up when does The Mandalorian take place, and the creators were like, it takes place just a few years after the events of Return of the Jedi. And I even think they said how many years it was, and it's a relatively short period of time. And I think that's one of the things that's so good about it, is because if you like the first 3 Star Wars movies, the ones that came out in the 70s and 80s, that sort of fits like what the aesthetic of the show fits that timeline or that era, and that's what they're going for. They're going like this. They're getting back to the roots.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to summarize it. Actually, I think that's a good way to wrap up the conversation.
I think so too.
I added another topic. I think I'm going to postpone it though for a focused episode all about other things surrounding that topic as well.
Yeah. I think that's a good idea.
The only reason I even added it into the notes was just so I didn't forget about it, because it's been a recent discovery and enjoyment. So I think unless there's anything else specific to The Mandalorian or Star Wars, that's a pretty good place to wrap tonight's show.
I agree.
You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at untitled_hosts. Send us an email at untitled.hosts@gmail.com or follow the feed directly at theuntitledpodcast.com. You can also find all sorts of ways to contact Jesse at jthart.com. Thank you for listening. That's a wrap.